everybody, and welcome to another edition of Speaking of. I'm here, as often, by my cohort Ann Snyder, and today we're going to talk about how to take no for an answer. What does that mean, you may ask? I thought I heard you ask that. What we're talking about is all the years or months or weeks and all the blood, sweat, and tears you've put in towards trying to make information better where you work, and all anybody tells you is no. What do you do? How do you approach this? How do you turn that around? So, Anne, the topic sprung to mind because, as I know you know, we recently had a project where we had a client to whom we presented a list of our usually well thought out action items.
Mm-hmm.
And I seem to remember you making the point of saying, before you do anything else, you have to do this. And they
Yes.
said,
No, we're absolutely not doing that.
and after we screamed silently on our own skulls, what do you do if you're trying to do this sort of work at an organization with a manager whose response is like the one we received?
Mhm.
What do you do?
So you're looking at the perspective of an IG practitioner at some company who gets a no from someone, right?
Yeah.
I think it depends on what you're asking and who's saying no. So what is the ask and who's the person saying no? So there's I think a substantial difference between an end user saying no to something versus your direct manager or someone higher up in the organization. So it's what's the ask and who is the person saying no. So I would respond very differently to each of those kinds of scenarios.
Do tell.
Do tell. Okay. I knew you were going to ask that follow-up question. So I think, if it's a higher person, a person manager or above or something like that, you may not have the right audience. There's a possibility that you don't have the right person, someone who can sign off on it, or someone who is the right stakeholder. So that's the first step is, do I have the right person? And if I'm pretty well convinced that I have the right person, that means I'm going to have to reframe the ask. If I think it's the right ask to the right person, and I do really think it's that important, then it needs to be reframed in a way that the person can understand it. And I need to understand what that person's reasons are for saying no, because it could just be, there could be something so simple as we don't have budget for it, I don't have resources for it, some kind of other something is going on in the company, but I think it involves investigation of all of those points. What's the ask? Who's the person? Why am I getting a no? Is it the correct person? And then if I have all of those things aligned, then understanding why this person is saying no specifically.
It's interesting what a wide range of reasons we get too when we ask. I had a call recently. I'm trying to think how I can describe this and not identify the guilty. Essentially, it's a highly siloed organization, and it's been that way forever. And when the economy soured, literally half the staff that was involved with information in some way, shape, or form was let go, and the remaining people are now sort of terrified that they're next, even though things have stabilized. And in peeling back the layers on this, the reason people were essentially saying no, besides, well, we've never done it that way before, and everything is fine, which of course it's not. It had to do with basically turf battles that the people in charge of the individual silos wanted to be sure that they maintained their relevance. To which I responded, "That's interesting. How are they defining relevant? Is it relevant because they maintain control over a particular piece of equipment that they spent lots of money for, really just so they could remain relevant? Or really, and I think this is where we want to go, are we able to turn the definition of relevance to being basically a superhero at your job? Are you serving your constituents in the best way you can, and thus increase your relevance to the efficacy of the organization and to the satisfaction of the constituents?"
And I think that kind of, changing someone's mindset to that perspective. I mean, you have to first understand what their reason is. What if it's the reasons you're discussing, maintaining relevance, continuing to be important in your job because of job cutbacks and things like that. That's a different kind of pressure, and getting someone to flip their thinking on it in that context might be very, very hard. But you need to understand first what you're dealing with.
And so, what does that mean? How do you go about that?
Ask. No, I mean, I know, I think it's something as basic. I know that sounds simple and simplistic, but it's not. It's the basic sit down and have a conversation. Why are you saying no? And depending on, you have to build some rapport to have that kind of conversation. That's, I can't teach you in 2 seconds how to build a rapport with people when you're having a conversation with them. But it's that kind of investigatory stuff that we do all the time. Listening to what they're actually saying. So no is no just, somebody, exerting authority. Is no because a person has another concern. You have to ask the follow-up questions and then gauge it from there. So I don't know, without asking that first question, engaging the response, what the next question is going to be.
So in other words, don't take no for an answer, at least not on its surface.
Well, I think
when they say no, don't just go, oh, okay, and slink off.
I think it's. I mean, if you actually think that you've spent time researching an initiative that's been your job, and you have a great idea that will move the company forward in a meaningful way, and you just get a simple no or the brush off. Again, you have to assess that in the context of your situation too. To see if you actually think you have an opening there. And if you do, I think it's worth the follow-up question. And you obviously have to do it with some level of decorum and, understanding what your position is, who's saying no, and having some kind of, bit of a spidey sense of why they might be saying no, and what your relationship is to that situation. So, it's all the sort of basic good judgment to determine what the next steps are. But I don't, in the case that we were talking about, that's a client situation. Ultimately, the client gets to decide what they do. You can follow up and say why you think it's important and why they should take your guidance seriously. But you can't bludgeon a person into a good idea. You have to convince them. But that requires understanding what their thinking is and what's the reason behind the no. But I don't usually take. I don't think I take no for an answer usually, Steve. Do I? So
I have different answers to that depending on whether we're in the same room or not.
That's just striking distance. Is that what your concern is?
So we've got about a minute left. I really like the idea of what do you do when you get a no. I like the idea of ask why, or why not. Just to draw upon another lesson, I think from this same environment we were discussing, having other allies, I think, is helpful too, because while this one person gave us a flat no, I'm not doing that, afterwards there was another person who basically said, I know what you're getting at, and it's a good idea. I'll work on it.
Right. Well, I do. By the way, before we break, I do have an example of where I did actually get a no initially, and it was it was more like an end user, one of the people, not a a higher, not just an end user, but also one of the major constituents, but also an end user who said no. And I pressed a little bit more and continued to talk to this person and did build up a good rapport to understand why a no. And basically it came down to, hey, we've heard this before. This has been tried before. We've been promised this before and no one has delivered. Or this went through before and nobody asked our input and then it didn't work out. So those kinds of things. So if you find it's something like that, you can work with those people and let them be heard, listen to them, understand that they've been through this before. Somebody else's failure is a barrier you have to overcome. But the person I'm thinking of in particular ended up being one of the biggest champions of the work I was doing because he saw it moving forward. And then the other part of it was making sure that he understood what was in it for his organization or his stakeholders within the organization. Like, how is this going to make your life easier? So that's one of those things that if you can tie it back to what that person's interest is in the organization, I think that that's really some of the most compelling kind of argument that you could make to them. So and I think about that particular scenario, it's just that we hadn't maybe made that case initially in the first statement. And I think that's why we got to know. But so I think it's making that nexus for people.
And here we go into one of my favorite subjects, change management.
Mhm.
But we'll have to speak of that another time.
And there's also just there are different people that you have to. There are different types of stakeholders and their reasons for being resistant to change, and some of them are more able to be reasoned with than others. So you just have to. I do think you also have to adjust tactics, not just for the scenario, the factual scenario, the IG issue that you're working with and making sure they understand it, but also for the personality differences of the stakeholders as well.
Right. Well, it was rather a long minute, but here we are at the end of our time.
Sorry.
That's okay. That's why we're here. And thanks, as always, for your perspectives.
Sure.
Folks, keep those cards and letters coming, and we will see you next time.